All rise. Court's back in session. Be seated, please. The bailiff reported to me juror number 13, Miss Fonda, is quite ill. She's been throwing up in the bathroom back there. I think we need to excuse her. She's our first alternate. Anybody wouldn't be hurt on that.
No objection from the state.
If I could just get a second to consult with Mr. Padilla, co-counsel, he's not outside. We didn't know about
No, we're not waiting for somebody who's not here.
I'm sorry?
We're not waiting for somebody who's not here.
Okay.
Do you have an objection? McBanum.
Defer to the court.
What's that?
Defer to the court.
Okay. I mean, apparently, why don't you state what your situation, what you've discovered?
Okay.
This is Deputy Granger.
Yeah, when we broke for lunch, you could hear her throwing up in the bathroom. She's been in there asleep now. She said she didn't get any sleep last night or whatever. I got her a ginger ale and she's still feeling pretty bad.
All right, thank you. Tell her she's excused.
Yes, sir.
And after you do that, you can bring the jury in.
Yes.
All right. All rise for the jury.
Oh.
Everybody be seated. You may resume, Ms. North.
Yes, sir. At this time, I request to publish State's Exhibit 180.
Objection.
What was the number again?
It was 180.
180.
Yes, sir.
If you'd use the microphone, it'd help us all out, Ms. Norris.
Yes, sir.
I understand there's an objection from the defense.
Yeah,
As
motions
to
in
hearsay.
limine.
What?
Motions in limine, hearsay, relevance, and we would cite State v. Brooks, 787 Southern 2nd, 765. That's a 2001 Florida Supreme Court case.
Objections overruled. Proceed.
Yes, sir.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, the FBI is here asking for records for Katie.
For what?
That she works here.
I wouldn't give anything.
Yeah, and then
I don't know.
the ex, did she work there? I was like, yeah, she works there, but I don't know what you want. Because remember we sent that.
Erika.
Yeah.
Do me a favor. I'm not there right now, and I'm in surgery. But it's not my office. It's my dad's office. So I can't give anything out.
Right.
So I don't have access to it. I don't know where anything is.
Okay.
So you don't have access to anything. So
I don't know where anything is either.
Yeah. So I would do this. I would not. I would not speak to anybody. You can do whatever you want, but I don't. It's my dad's office.
Yeah.
So I don't have access to any of that stuff.
Okay.
So they can talk to my dad, and I'm sure they'll be able to get whatever they want from them.
Okay, understandable.
So if I had it, listen, you can talk to whoever you want. I shouldn't say don't talk to anybody.
No, I'm going to do whatever you tell me.
Yeah, I'm not. I shouldn't say don't talk to anyone. Talk to whoever on the planet you want to talk to. But it's not my office, and it's not your office.
Right.
So you don't have records to give them, and I don't have records to give them. So I'm sure they'll be able to help them out in any way they can.
Okay, so that's what I tell them.
Tell them that it's not, I mean, it's not my office. The office was sold back to my dad, actually,
Right.
a long time ago. So tell them that so it's actually, you're talking to the wrong Dr. Adelson.
Right.
So what you need to do is tell them that you will get in contact. So tell them, I mean, it's not your office. You can't
So
give out records.
they said within 20 days of the Florida statute, provide above cause, with reason.
Are they there now, or are they just standing?
They're there, but I'm in the back. They're just waiting for me to come back.
Oh, and they want records?
Yes.
Do me a favor. I'm going to call you from a landline on your cell phone, okay?
Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Ms. Johnson, if it's not Charlie Adelson's office, why did you call him and not Harvey Adelson?
Because that's his girlfriend, and I know
I
he would
can't hear
answer.
you, Ms. Johnson. Get a little closer to that microphone, please.
Because that's his girlfriend, and I know he would answer the phone faster than Dr. Adelson.
So you didn't call the person that you knew would have the records that they were seeking?
I was-
Overruled.
So you didn't call the person who you knew would have the access to the records that the FBI was requesting?
Correct.
What kind of social media does the Adelson Institute have?
None.
So there wasn't anybody working doing social media promotion for the Adelson Institute, right?
Not that I know of.
You just indicated they had no social media.
And what time or frame are we talking about, Ms. Norris? Are we talking about now or some other time?
Yes, sir. From 2014 to 2016.
We had a blog. A blog.
You mentioned on cross-examination a website person that you met one time.
Yes.
That was not Catherine McBanois.
No.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Recross. Garcia.
No, Your Honor, nothing from Mr. Garcia.
McBanois.
Real brief, Your Honor. You just asked a question, so you didn't call the person who had access to the records. Do you remember being asked that question?
Yes.
You would agree that sounds like they even agree that those records exist.
Yes.
That's not a proper question. Let's leave other counsel out of it. We've been doing that all morning. I don't want either side trying to disparage the other side. Ask your questions of witnesses. Leave the attorneys out of it.
If you know, within the 20 days of that subpoena, those records were provided, right?
Yes.
So they do exist.
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor.
All right. Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, we'll go sidebar. You can step down. Do we need to keep this witness any further?
No, Your Honor.
No, Judge.
No, Your Honor.
You're excused. It was a question from the jury. It was not a question for the witness. It was really a legal question. It says, are all subpoenas the same? Do they all offer immunity? A subpoena, what we would call a subpoena ducis tecum, that means a subpoena requiring records does not provide immunity to anyone. The immunity I talked about the other day is immunity from testifying. Before that comes into play, the state has subpoenaed a witness. They have asked me to compel the witness to testify, and then based upon the state's request, I have compelled the witness to answer questions. That's when the derivative use immunity comes into play that I discussed the other day. This kind of subpoena would not confer any type of immunity on anyone. Anybody have any objection to my comments?
No, Judge.
All right. Call your next witness.
State Police Sergeant Chris Corbitt, recall.
You can have a seat, sir. You remain under oath.
Yes, sir.
Just for the record purposes, state and spell your name again, please, sir.
Certainly. It's Christopher Corbitt, and that's Corbitt.
I need to make sure your computer's not blocking the microphone there.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. That's a change from last time. If I can move this over a little bit.
Is that security?
That should work. It was awake.
We've been trying to get a little bit better sound in here, so we've put a new microphone in, and we may need to adjust the placement of it a little bit, but anyway. Are y'all ready?
Is it ready?
Your Honor, unfortunately, can we go sidebar?
Okay.
It's coming now. Yeah.
May I inquire?
Have y'all received the document?
I have, and I'm refreshing my email every 2 seconds.
I have it now.
Give Mr. Singh a copy, please. So, in Florida, we have pretty broad discovery rules. Things are supposed to be shared with the other side before they're presented, so this is a little bit last minute, but they're being shown some documents they should have been given before, but anyway, that's the slight delay. I'm sorry. You can proceed.
Thank you. Sergeant Corbitt, where we left off from the last time you testified, we had discussed the location information in July of 2014 for Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. Is that about right?
That's correct, yes.
Did further analysis of those phone records for all the parties involved in this case provide additional information about potential prior trips to Tallahassee from Miami?
Yes, it did.
And what was that additional information based on?
Mr. Rivera's phone records show that there was a trip from Miami to Tallahassee in June of 2014.
And again, in preparation for explaining or showing the phone records that you relied on in this case, did you prepare demonstrative showing on a map the location of the cell phone data that was introduced previously?
Yes, I did.
And would that assist the jury in visually understanding the dates and times and locations about the communication events you're going to testify about today?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. May I use the demonstrative, Judge?
You may.
You know, if you could start by showing us the phone records that we relied upon for your statement that there was a trip in June by Mr. Rivera's handset.
Yes, again, going back to the call detail records and that section of the records that gives us the location information, we're simply able to take those cell sites and plot those on the map to get an idea of dates and times and travel. And what we saw was that, again, looking at the kind of the chronology of the cell sites that were utilized here, we can see a travel from Miami north to the Tallahassee area, arriving in Tallahassee sometime a little after noon on June 4th.
And are these records in blue only for Rivera?
That is correct.
And so we see this path going up towards Tallahassee on June 4th. Do we also see from Rivera's phone records a return trip down to Miami on another date?
Yes, we do. We see that on June 5th in the afternoon. We start seeing cell sites utilized that would indicate travel away from Tallahassee and south back towards the Miami area.
Can you explain to us why it is that we do not have any, or whether we do have any records for Sigfredo Garcia for this same time?
Objection to hearsay response, calls for a hearsay response.
Overruled.
Yes, actually, I can't answer the question. We do not have records with location information for Mr. Garcia for this time frame. We do have records, and we are able to see some activity and things like that with the phone, but we do not have locations. And we made many requests of the phone company that's powered or that provided for that phone number, and we were never able to obtain those records. They were in the process. It was a Metro PCS.
Judge, call for a
Overruled.
hearsay response.
Overruled.
Metro PCS was in the process of being taken over by T-Mobile. We served legal demands on both companies and obtained results from both of them, and neither had that location information that we were looking for this June trip.
And was that a broader period of time that they didn't have any location information, or just June 4th and 5th?
It was a broader period of time, yes.
Okay, Mayor, Approach Honor,
You know,
I'm showing you what I've marked for identification as States Exhibit 93. Do you recognize that map?
I do.
And does that accurately summarize the location information for Luis Rivera's handset going from Miami to Tallahassee on June 4th of 2014?
Yes, it does.
I'm also showing you States Exhibit 94. Does this map accurately reflect the location information from Luis Rivera's handset on June 5th, returning from Tallahassee, going from Tallahassee to Miami?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I'd offer into evidence what's been pre-noticed as a summary, States Exhibit 93 and 94.
Any objection?
I'm sorry, Your Honor. It's a substantial demonstrative, I was going through it.
No, it's just...
That's not, yeah. What
No,
we're talking about.
no objection to those documents from Mr. Garcia.
Objection.
All right, 93 and 94 will be admitted.
Despite the lack of location information for Mr. Garcia's handset for this time period, did law enforcement develop any other information indicating that Mr. Rivera did not take this trip to Tallahassee alone?
Yes.
What type of information?
I believe there was some witness information that indicated the two were together.
Objection, Judge. Calls for hearsay.
Would that go into substance of what a witness said, please, sir?
Absolutely.
Your Honor, you have to move for a Richardson hearing.
Oh,
Who, for what?
A Richardson hearing.
On what
In
he
review
just
of the
said?
documents,
On what documents you coming?
the ones that we were just handed.
Yes, Judge, I'm going to join in on that request.
All right, deny that request. Move on.
did you locate a rental vehicle or a rental car agreement that appeared to indicate Mr. Garcia attended this June trip?
Yes, we did.
Objection, Judge. Calls for speculation.
Ask your question again, don't answer it for me.
Yes, sir. Did law enforcement recover a rental agreement from Comfort Rental Car from June of 2014?
I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead.
Yes, we did.
And can we look at the information in detail on that Comfort Rental Car agreement? And for the
What
record,
is the question?
sorry, for the record, this is in evidence as States Exhibit 89.
Yeah.
That rental agreement, was it dated on June 2nd, 2014?
Yes, it was.
And, yeah, if you could go back one, please.
Sorry.
It's okay. So it's for Comfort Rental Car, and were you able to ascertain the location of the Comfort Rental Car company based on the contract?
Yes, the contract has an address and a contact number for them.
And if you could go to the next slide, did it also have the time indicating at what time it was rented?
Well, we have the time that it was due in, and it was a 3-day rental.
Okay, and it was due in on June 5th, 2014 at 8:50 p.m.,
That's correct.
which would have meant it was rented June 2nd at 8:50 p.m.
Correct.
Okay, do you have the vehicle information from that contract that's in evidence?
We do. It was a silver Nissan Altima.
Now, anywhere, have you reviewed that rental contract from Comfort?
Yes,
On anywhere on that contract, did Luis Rivera's name appear?
it did not.
Is there any phone evidence or communication records in this case that would shed light on how this rental vehicle was picked up from Comfort Rental Car?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And whose communication records did that information come from?
Well, we looked at Ms. Magbanowa's records around the time of that rental would have been picked up, and her records do have location information. So we looked at those and what possible locations her handset may have been in.
And these records that you're showing us on the slide are all come directly from the Catherine Magbanowa phone records that we showed the disc the other day and is in evidence in this case.
That's correct.
Were you able to plot those locations for the date of the rental on June 2nd, 2014 for Ms. Magbanowa?
We were.
And what did it reveal?
What we see, again, just looking at merely the cell sites that were communicated with, they will be consistent with some travel west and towards the area of the Comfort Rent-A-Car.
So you have indicated up here some different times, 8:25 p.m. to the far right. Was that event consistent with Ms. Magbanowa's residence at the time?
It would be, yes.
And then I see a red dot for 8:34. Is that another event?
Yes, it is.
And then finally, from 8:53 p.m. to 8:58 p.m., her handset is communicating with the tower consistent with Comfort Rental Car?
It is, yes. We look at the actual sector that was utilized versus the location of the rental car company.
And was the time that Catherine Magbanowa's handset was communicating with that tower consistent with Comfort Rental Car? Is that consistent with the time, the 8:50 p.m. time of the rental contract?
It is, yes.
Were you able to look at who specifically Ms. Magbanowa was communicating with during this time period?
Yes. Again, going back to the call detail records, it's fairly easy for us to identify known phone numbers and then simply replace those known phone numbers with names so that it makes a little more sense for us as we're looking at stuff.
Go back, please.
I'm sorry.
I want you to go to the... So again, these records that we're looking at here come directly from the CD and evidence of her records.
That's correct.
All right. And, okay, so were you able to make it a little more readable for the jury?
Yes.
And can you show us that demonstrative, please? So what time frame of events are we looking at here?
Again, we're still looking in this 8:25 p.m. to 10:01 p.m. time frame for any activity that was in the records.
One of the previous location slides showed Magbanowa's handset, leaving the area of her residence around 8:25 and getting to the Comfort Rental area around 8:53 p.m. During that time, so 8:25 to 8:54, were there any communications between Catherine Magbanowa and Sigfredo Garcia?
There was just at the 10 o'clock time frame.
That's not the time frame. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. If you're asking specifically during the travel time, no.
No. Would that be consistent with them being together?
It could be.
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Was one of the events that Catherine Magbanowa had on her phone during the time period consistent with Comfort Rental Car a communication with Charlie Adelson?
Yes.
Which one?
The 9:17 call is a little over 25-minute phone call.
Wait, is there one before that?
Oh, I'm sorry. The 8:57 is Mr. Adelson attempting to reach Ms. Magbanowa. Yes.
Okay. And then is there another phone call involving Mr. Adelson?
Yes, at 9:17.
And how long was that call?
Just over 25 minutes.
Do you have location well, strike that. Do you have location information for the event with Charlie Adelson for the 25-minute phone call?
We do.
And can you show us a demonstrative of that on the map?
Yes, and these are the remainder of the events in the records that have locations, and again will be consistent with travel back towards the east.
So while traveling east, that's when we have her on her handset communicating with Charles Adelson.
That's correct.
So we've just looked at Ms. Magbanowa's whereabouts. Where during this time frame of the Comfort Rental was Luis Rivera?
For the events that we have in this time frame, he is communicating with two cell sites that are in close proximity to his residence.
Okay. Are the cell sites that Mr. Rivera's handset is communicating with during the time frame of the rental car, is that consistent with Comfort Rental?
It is not.
Was law enforcement able to gather any other evidence tending to show who rented the June 2nd, 2014 vehicle?
Your Honor, with what's contained in the next two slides, that is what we are moving for Richardson hearing for. If we could approach sidebar.
Go ahead.
Can you take me back to where we last were with the location of Rivera's handset? Okay. Now can you skip the next 2 slides and go to the next rental agreement from Comfort Rental Car, showing that contract? Okay. We discussed the June 2nd rental. Did law enforcement also get us another rental agreement from Comfort Rental Car?
Yes, we did.
And that, what was the date on that rental?
The date out for that was June 3rd.
And it was a different vehicle indicated than the one from June 2nd.
That's correct. The Nissan Altima was replaced with a Hyundai Sonata.
Objection, Judge. He's making a legal conclusion that the car was replaced. There's no evidence.
Right.
specific-
Yep. We're not going to get into speaking objection,
I
Mr.
apologize.
Sankey.
I was-
I overrule the objection.
And on that June 3rd contract for the Hyundai Sonata, was Mr. Rivera's name anywhere on that contract if you've reviewed it?
It was not.
Tell me a little more about the travel based on Mr. Rivera's phone records on June 4th, 2014. If you could show me a map of that.
Again, we see the use of cell sites that will be consistent with travel from Miami towards Tallahassee.
And did law enforcement discover a traffic citation that was issued to Mr. or to anyone in this case?
Yeah.
That's what we were skipping over.
This is different, Judge.
Oh, this is the one in Gainesville?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Okay. And this traffic citation was on what date?
This traffic citation was issued June 4th at 9:12 a.m.
To a Mr. Rivera?
That's correct.
And did that ticket provide location information that you could use to compare with the location of Mr. Rivera's handset traveling from Miami to Tallahassee?
It did. The citation indicates it was issued on I-75 northbound at the 374 mile marker.
Can you show us where that lays in the path of travel?
I can.
Excuse me. Do you have you did the close-up, thank you. Okay, and then can you show us where that traffic citation was issued in relation to the remainder of the trip up to Tallahassee? Where did,
Has he answered the question?
I'm sorry.
Yes. Here again, we see the location of the traffic citation and the time that it was issued falls in between cell sites that were utilized. So chronologically, it fits in there. And then we see the continued travel to Tallahassee.
Once the handset makes its way to Tallahassee, can you tell, based on the location information from the records and evidence, where it goes?
The handset communicates or has a lot of events that are communicating with a cell site that would be consistent with the Budget Inn hotel.
And do you have a time of arrival in Tallahassee based on the data?
I believe that first use of that cell site was about 12:38 p.m. on the 4th.
What, if anything, do the phone records tell you about this handset's activities upon arrival in Tallahassee at the Budget Inn?
Only that it spent a significant amount of time there relative to the time it was here in town.
And why do you say you can tell that it spent a significant amount of time at the Budget Inn? Why is that?
That's overstating what he said, Ms. Norris. Let's not misstate what an expert is saying, please.
Yes, sir. What did you learn about the handset in relation to Budget Inn?
In the time frame between the 12:38 p.m. event on June 4th and 11:20 a.m. on June 5th, there were a number of events, over 180 events, that communicated with this cell site, and again, that will be consistent with servicing the Budget Inn. There were other events and other activities, but there were a significant number here on this particular cell site.
Was there any other information you had to indicate the location of the Comfort rental car in relation to the Budget Inn?
We did. The Comfort rental car was equipped with a tracking device that provided location information on a periodic basis, and that location information for the morning of June 5th shows it consistent with the parking lot of the Budget Inn.
Was there any activity with Mr. Rivera's handset nearby or anywhere near 2116 Trescott Drive, Dan Markel's residence?
Yes, we did see events in the afternoon, beginning at about 12:30, a little after 12:30, that went through 325, that were communicating with the cell site and sector that would be consistent with the area around Mr. Markel's residence.
Any additional evidence other than phone records that are consistent with the Trescott Drive address?
Yes, again, we had the rental GPS location, which is also consistent with that area. And we can see that that area is actually a park here.
Is that Winthrop Park?
I believe it is, yes.
Now, from Mr. Rivera's records, could you tell whether, or strike that, were there any communications around this time, meaning 3:17, 3:20 p.m., with either Sigfredo Garcia or Luis Rivera and Comfort Rental Car?
There was, yes. And again, not having location information for Mr. Garcia's records, we still were able to see events. And we see that there was an incoming phone call at 3:24 from Comfort Rent-A-Car.
And this line item here is directly from Mr. Garcia's phone records, which are in evidence?
That's correct.
After the call, did that call appear to connect, or do you know the answer?
21 seconds, it's difficult to say for sure if it connected or what kind of communication there was for such a short call.
After that phone call, what do the Mr. Rivera's records indicate about his handset's movements?
Shortly thereafter, we have the 325 event that was still consistent with Trescott Drive, and then our next events are showing travel away from Tallahassee and back towards Miami.
Did you get, for this trip back down to Miami, any more of that GPS information from Comfort?
We did. There was an additional location at 5:38 p.m., and again, falls in chronologically with our cell site usage.
And then what time does Rivera's handset arrive back in Miami?
They reached the Miami area in just after midnight.
Objection as to classification of day, Judge. He's speculating.
Overruled.
You said just after midnight on what date?
I'm sorry, it would have been the morning of June 6th.
Were there any records of communication between Catherine McBanois and Sigfredo Garcia during this time frame, July 4th through July 6th, 2014?
Objection, Your Honor. Classification of communication between people versus handsets.
Clarify that, please.
Yes, sir. Were there any communications between Catherine McBanois' handset and Sigfredo Garcia's handset during the June 4th through 6th time period?
Yes, there was.
Now, once, strike that. Did you examine the phone records for any locations of interest in Miami upon the return on June 6, 2014?
Yes, again, for the morning of June 6th, we had the rental location, or the location for the rental vehicle, and we see that that is in relative close proximity to Ms. McBanois' residence.
And the GPS is the green and the residence is yellow?
That's correct.
Do you know at the time that the GPS is pinging on June 6th at 8:48 a.m. Where Mr. Rivera's handset is located?
We only have events 7:30 and 9:43, so not exactly in the time frame of that GPS location, but both of those events are consistent with his residence.
Objection, misleading the jury as to Rivera's residence.
Overruled.
Okay, so the rental car on June 6th pings around 9 a.m. Later on that same day, were we able to examine the communication records for Catherine McBanois' handset the evening after the GPS shows the vehicle at that location.
That was so convoluted, Ms. Norris. Let's ask a simple question, please.
Yes, sir.
Somebody might understand.
Did you examine Catherine Magbanow's phone records the evening of June 6th?
Yes, I did.
And what do they show?
Again, just looking at the cell sites that were utilized and the times, they will be consistent with travel towards the area where Comfort Rent-A-Car was located.
What time frame are we talking about for communication? If you could go back just briefly, I'm sorry.
This would be beginning about 4:30 in the afternoon.
And chronologically, if we're looking at this demonstrative mapping the location, would we start right to left?
We would, yes.
And then do you have a close-up of the events consistent with Comfort Rental Car for Catherine's handset?
Yes.
During the 5:15, 5:20 time period, do we have location information for Luis Rivera's handset?
We do.
And what does it demonstrate?
Again, communication with a cell site that is not in close proximity to the Comfort Rent-A-Car.
Same objection, Your Honor, as to what Rivera's residence is.
Overruled.
What is the next significant phone event that we have chronologically in this case after this June trip?
Well, chronologically, we have the phone call to Harvey Adelson that was one of the things we identified from the comparison to the tower dump records.
And that was
The tower dump.
and if I recall, the significance was that was the one call between Sigfredo Garcia and any of the Adelsons.
That's correct.
Is there any indication that this July 1, 2014 call was forwarded from
Remind
the...
us what the date of this is.
Oh, July 1? Of 2014?
I'm adding the list. I think we'll let the witness testify.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. This is the afternoon of July 1st of 2014
At what time?
at 5:20.
Is there any indication based on the records that that attempted phone call was forwarded from the Adelson Institute to Harvey Adelson's cellular phone?
There is not in the records. What we see here, there's actually, this is from the Mr. Adelson's raw call detail records, and there's really three events that comprise this one phone call. And what we see initially, and hopefully you guys can see, this is Mr. Garcia's number incoming to Mr. Adelson. This indicates here that it is a non-AT&T cell phone calling an AT&T cell phone. That's what the little m to the big M. And then the VMC indicates voicemail, that call was routed to voicemail, Mr. Adelson's voicemail. The next two events are showing that routing to the voicemail. So I have no indication that that call came from any place other than Mr. Garcia's handset.
Do the phone records we've been discussing for Mr. Garcia and Mr. Rivera indicate a possible second trip of these two handsets?
Yes.
And when did that?
Judge, I'm not objecting to the classification of two headsets.
But we're going to quit doing speaking objections, Mr. Sanganet.
It's rather misstating the facts.
Overruled.
Did you answer? I couldn't hear.
That may be kind of legalese to y'all. When an attorney makes an objection, what they're supposed to do is state a legal objection to the question, not make an argument in front of the jury. That's not appropriate to make their argument in front of the juries. That's what I'm talking about. We're not supposed to have speaking objections. So you understand what's going on.
I'm going to repeat my last question. Did you find evidence of the handsets going from Miami to Tallahassee again?
Yes, we did.
During what time period?
That was leaving Miami June 16th and returning the evening of the 18th.
Now, what records was that based on? Did you say June just now?
I believe that I did, is what I was just thinking. I certainly meant July.
Whose records was that based on?
Those were based on both Mr. Rivera and Mr. Garcia's records.
So now they do have location information for July of 2014 for Mr. Garcia's handset.
We do, yes.
Other than the phone records, was law enforcement able to gather other pieces of evidence to corroborate this second trip in July?
Yes, there were other things, again, rental contract, witnesses, GPS vehicle location information, other pieces of evidence that we use to compare with the cell phone records to see how those aligned.
You mentioned a rental car. Was another vehicle rented in
Yes.
July 2014?
Yes.
Is there anything that you were prompted to do based on your knowledge of the July car rental?
Well, of course, how the vehicle was rented is a question. Who contacted the rental company, who picked up the rental car. So in looking at the records for that morning that the vehicle was actually rented, we saw in Mr. Garcia's records that fairly early on at 9 o'clock in the morning, he makes an outgoing call to the Comfort Rent-A-Car, which was the rental company from the June trip. We see later on in the afternoon, there's a call to the Hybrid or Save Gas, and that was the rental company that the second vehicle was ultimately rented from.
So did that, knowing that this vehicle was rented from Hybrid, did that prompt you to look at different communication records as to what led up to the rental?
We did, and you can see some of the events here prior to the call, the first call to the rental company. But we also look back to the previous evening to see what communications there were between any of our involved parties.
So these are the records from July 14th up until the early morning hours of July 15th.
That's correct. They run the late evening hours of the 14th into the early morning of the 15th.
And what date was the second car rented?
It was rented on the 15th.
Do we have any information based on Charlie Adelson's phone records and other evidence of this case about Charlie Adelson's activities this evening of July 14th?
Yes. I believe that he and Ms. Magbanawa met that
Objection,
evening.
speculation.
Overruled.
You can answer.
I did. I believe that they met that evening. The location information for Mr. Adelson's handset, as well as communication from his iCloud account, was consistent with going to dinner that evening.
And you're, okay, strike that. Does the location information for Charles Adelson also showing, strike that, excuse me. Does Charlie Adelson's phone records show him at his residence and then going to Catherine Magbanawa's residence or his handset?
Yes.
And based on Charlie Adelson's records, where does he appear to be by 1 a.m. on July 15, 2014?
He has departed the area of Ms. Magbanawa's residence.
For these events on July 15th at 12:48 a.m., going through the last event that's shown here at 1:56 a.m., where's the location of her handset?
Her handset at this time frame will be consistent with her residence.
This 1:56 a.m. call, who is that between and in which direction?
That is Ms. Magbanawa calling Mr. Garcia.
What's the duration of that call?
2 minutes and 30 seconds.
And then can you show us the next slide with Mr. Garcia's call records? But 9:09 a.m. call to Comfort. The next rental car call was at what time?
It was at 4:28 p.m.
After the call from Mr. Garcia to save gas, how would you describe the frequency of communication between Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera?
They did exchange at least a few communications, either voice calls or text messages, both before and after.
And then did we have in evidence the hybrid rental for this July trip.
Yes.
Based on that rental agreement, were you able to ascertain the location of the hybrid rental car company?
Yes. Hybrid rent-a-car has a Biscayne Boulevard address, which we'll see in just a second.
And, sorry. And next, did you find a number associated with Sigfredo Garcia on the contract rented by Mr. Rivera?
Yes, at the top of the contract, written in is the indication of brother, and that is Mr. Garcia's number.
And the type of vehicle rented, you could show that. That's also directly from the hybrid rental agreement?
That's correct.
Were you able to put the location of the hybrid rental company on a map so that we can see the locations of Mr. Garcia and Mr. Rivera respectively during the time frame of the rental?
Yes.
And what does it show?
We see that at the approximate time of the car rental, both handsets are communicating with cell sites and sectors that, again, would be consistent with servicing the rental car agency.
I want to ask you about Ms. Magbanowa's call activity after this rental time period. At the time the Prius is being rented from Save Gas, who is Catherine Magbanowa's handset communicating with?
Well, just after the rental, 6:29, there was a call from Mr. Adelson, and this summary here is just the communications between Ms. Magbanowa, Mr. Garcia, and Mr. Adelson for this particular summary. Mr. Adelson, Charlie Adelson.
So from the exact raw records, you've just narrowed it down, excerpts from those records, is that right?
That's correct.
We see some communications here between Ms. Magbanowa and Mr. Garcia. Does there come a time where those communications cease?
They do. The 9:30 call from Mr. Garcia, it concludes that back and forth calling for these two handsets that evening.
And what we're looking at here is an approximately 3-hour period
Yes.
of call activity?
Let's take a short break. We'll take 10 minutes. We'll stay in session. Be seated. So we figured out the discovery status of the ticket. Is there, let's give it a number. Is there a number for this asserted new traffic ticket?
The exhibit number?
Yes.
122.
Okay. So have we decided where we stand on discovery?
Your Honor, my understanding, we did provide the DHSMV certified records for Mr. Garcia in this case, which included this citation, number A20B-1NE. The actual UTC picture itself, I do not believe was discovered, or we can't find it.
So when did we provide the driving records?
June 11th of 2019.
But it did not include the ticket under State's Exhibit 122. If Ms. Kappelman did the discovery, why don't we hear from Ms. Kappelman instead of her relaying you messages?
I don't really know all the answers to Your Honor's questions yet, but the
All right, well,
discovery.
we'll let you continue, research it.
Okay.
We'll be in recess.